I keep thinking you'll come on back to me.
It's time to think creatively and strategically about making small content do some serious heavy lifting. At one point, our next speaker oversaw communications of 38 academic departments, 5 professional schools, and 70 interdisciplinary research centers. This makes her quite qualified to walk us through 10 ways to make one piece of content work across web, social, and print. Please welcome Megan Costello.
Hi everyone, I'm Megan Costello. My hair is no longer blonde, so I'm sorry about that. You're in content heavy lifting, how to upcycle and recycle your content over and over again. And I'm actually going to talk about far more than 10 ways on how to lift some content. But first, I would be remiss if I didn't start with something that inspired this entire talk. This is me mildly hungover. I feel like I can say that after some of this morning's speakers. At the gym on a Saturday, getting ready to do barbell squats. This is not who I have historically been as a person. Weightlifting, weight training, strength training is something I've gotten into in the past like 2 to 3 years. While I was working at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, helping manage the communications portfolio, of which web was shoved into my portfolio of work. And as I was getting involved and interested in weight training a couple times a week, I started to notice that weight training, strength training, powerlifting can really teach us a lot about content strategy and content marketing. And I started to see things in weight training that translated to my role as a producer, manager, leader, and teammate in terms of content strategy. So I have 2 goals today. One, I'm gonna spend a little bit of time trying to evangelize all of you to pick up some damn weights in the weight room. No matter your fitness level, no matter your age, no matter how active you are, I think it's super awesome and you should all do it. And 2, which is why I'm really here, is to talk about ways to upcycle and recycle, to add and divide, and to really get the most lift out of your content, because all of us are strapped for time, talent, and resources. So with that, I'm gonna walk through a whole bunch of ways on how to get us there. But first, I wanna talk about weight training and why I love it. So there's like one basic thing that weight training does, which other activities do too, but if you lift weights, you basically are gonna live longer. Like that's the nut graph. If you do strength training, and there's 2 sort of big buckets of how strength training helps us think about living longer. One is sort of physical and one is mental. So weight training is associated with stabilizing body fat, preventing weight gain, preserving lean muscle mass over the long term. Mentally, it's associated with a whole bunch of other benefits, reduction in stress, higher rates of self-esteem, and increased rates of confidence. I can say as a woman who like never wanted to be in the weight room with just like dudes, this has been something I have definitely felt that has happened to me. So how or why? I think it's because weight training makes you really focus. Training for a marathon does too, but I think strength training really makes you think about rubber and the road and where the 2 meet. So you have to focus very singularly. So let's say it's January. All of us have some big goals. Goal might be, I'm gonna lose weight this year. That's big, broad goal, much like institutional goals that I'm used to dealing with in a large, decentralized public university. And it's my job as someone who wants to get fit and as a content strategist to really layer strategies and tactics to help me get there. So in weight training, you have to really think like, okay, what part of my body am I like not happy with that I wanna work on? What are the muscle groups that are there? How do those muscle groups move and work? What are the biodynamics of them? How often do I have to work them? How long should I work them for? How often should I rest? It's a skill that you develop over time. And so when I started thinking about what sort of goes into thinking about focus with strength training, I started to really see a lot of parallels in my job as a content strategist. One of our big, broad institutional goals is be excellent in teaching, much like many universities out there. And so my job is like, all right, how am I gonna unpack this? How are we gonna focus on what I need to do to get there? How is web a piece of that? How is print a piece of that? And so I've learned a lot about focus from thinking about that barbell squat rack mildly hungover on a Saturday. The other is this. So I work in higher education, and I have primarily worked for social scientists who love to say efficient and effective over and over and over again. weightlifting is super efficient and effective. Every time I walk past all the girls on the treadmill running for 45 minutes, all I think is like, I'm about to go weightlift for 45 minutes and burn far more calories than you are in a steady state on the cardio. And so I think about this a lot. I've historically been in a 1, 2, at most 4-person team working in a super large organization. And so I have to be super efficient and effective with the content that I'm doing, the content that I'm trying to lift across various channels. And so this is something that I think a lot about in my role as content strategist, and it's something I think about when I just don't really want to go to the gym for that long, so what can I do that can be a good investment? The other thing is that weight training really expands the longevity of whatever that activity was. So weight training is associated with speeding up your metabolism. It's associated with what is called the afterburn effect. Anyone who's ever moved a friend into their house or actually lifts weights, you know this because you spend basically the rest of your day just starving, which is awesome because I like to eat and drink. And so weight training helps you think a lot about what is the long tail of that exercise or that activity that I did. And in content, this is super important. Not only am I thinking about being efficient and effective, I'm thinking about what is the long tail of this content? How many lives, how many half-lives can this content have? Because I don't have a lot of people or resources to throw at making lots of new content. So expanding longevity. And the last is something that maybe higher ed in particular has sort of struggled with, and I've seen myself struggle with it, not having a lot of resources, which is that weight training is your progress is super tangible. And so I can remember the first time I stood up next to that barbell squat rack, and I could barely squat the bar, which is 45 pounds. And that was 2 years ago, and I've basically nearly tripled that. So, when I think about content strategy, man, if I could triple any data point that I had, I'm doing a real damn good job at my job. And so I like to think a lot about the results, the progress, what are the data points, all my stupid little binders that I keep of my little weightlifting routine. I try to think about that with content strategy. In higher education, I think this is really important because resources are being cut, especially in the institutions that I'm used to working in that are public. And so I try to think a lot about results and what results are, especially imagining what do I want success to look like, which I think is something my industry has struggled with. So this goes without saying, I also lift content. And I have spent 7 years in higher education. The team that I worked for, I worked at the large liberal arts college at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. It has a funny name, Letters and Science, many letters, one science. It was a large decentralized organization. I just recently left my post because I must be a craven for working with super small teams. So I built a team from 1 until 4 to 4 employees, and now I've just left it to join the Morgridge Institute for Research, also at Wisconsin, where I'm now a team of 2. And so I've had to think a lot about this. My job is to meaningfully engage audiences, to break down those big institutional goals. And so how can I do this with not a lot of resources, especially having worked for an economist? And so I think a lot about upcycling and recycling, and I had planned just to talk about upcycling and recycling, and then the content strategist, for those of you who are not following content strategist, just had an awesome blog post in January about divisible content, and I was like, perfect, this is recycling. And so when I think about the content portfolio that I'm putting together for the organizations that I work for, additive or upcycling might be those things that you see in the end of the year that was, looking back, this year in photos. You're plucking all of your content from the year and doing it into a roundup post. Often they sort of have this trends feel to them. And divisible content, with the content strategist had a really good idea for divisible content that doesn't totally translate to my industry, but let's say you have an ebook and you're gonna serially release the ebook in chapters and use Facebook targeting as a way to get that message out. So divisible, additive. These are things that I think a lot about in my portfolio of work. To tell you how I really did a bunch of lifting, uplifting, downlifting, upcycling, recycling of content, I want to tell you about a major initiative that I worked on beginning in 2013 up until my time leaving the college in 2015. And it is called the Letters and Science Career Initiative. For those of you who are like, great, I don't have an initiative, this is not helpful, I want to talk about this because it was this Goliath, amorphous, kind of ubiquitous thing that we were working on. And my team was very small. It was me and another person who was also managing our events, but also doing our graphic design and our website. And she and I really started when this initiative was coming on board. We had a new dean, so we had a leadership transition. One of the dean's major priorities, one of his signature priorities, was this initiative. But my college also has priorities in service, research, and teaching. So this was one of 4 big content strategy areas. I couldn't put all my resources into the career initiative in terms of our marketing dollars and our human dollars. And so I had to think really like, how are we gonna do this? And let me tell you what the goal of this initiative is. The goal is to transform our career services delivery model. Anyone who works in marketing just heard me say transform, which is a terrible word, initiative, delivery, services, these are kind of like super blasé words. These are hard words for myself as a content person to think about how am I gonna tell a compelling story with words like this. And so my team and I welcomed a writer on board as we were beginning this initiative. We started thinking, all right, this initiative is entirely privately funded. It's one of our dean's 4 large institutional goals. How are we gonna do this? And this initiative was a monster. We were launching a new course. We were hiring more career advisors. Our dean was on the road trying to raise money for it. This was super important. It was one of 4 big important things. And so we started thinking 6 months out. We have a print publication. I'm at a web conference, but I'm gonna talk about print because I think print still has a place. And so my team and I, when I think about sort of the big beast in our shop that is additive content, it is our print publication. We just have one. And so every year, 6 months out, we would start thinking, okay, everything we're gonna do, where it's on the web, if it's on Tumblr, if it's on social, how can we upcycle this into our print publication? I'm lucky that I worked in a unit that had our print publication along with the web and the marketing. We're a small shop, right? And unfortunately, I hear too often from some of my colleagues, I think especially in higher education and nonprofits, who like web, digital people are here and then like print publications are over here. And that really is such a damn shame because when you think additively, you don't really think about channel. You start to think about story. How do we get this story out in as many places as possible? And so I want to start from the top. So we started thinking about this print publication. And you can see it was kind of a stoic piece. Very red, looks like very the Academy. Well, this was a new thing that we were doing. And we always would think about these kind of stories, right? Origin stories, cover stories, hero stories, which I think is every story is ultimately about a person. So you're going to hear me use this term hero because I think every story needs to be grounded in a person. And so we needed to think really deliberately. We had a 6-month timeline. So I had 6 months to think about every piece of content that was coming out of my shop. How could we really use this in our print annual report? And then whatever was in that print annual report, what other legs did it have to live beyond that? So that's a tough task, especially because I had one writer, part of a graphic designer, and me. And so we took a big risk, and we hired a student designer who I amazingly, randomly found on Twitter one day. Like, talk about just like one of the most serendipitous things that happened. And so one of our early content heroes, and I'm gonna talk a little bit about art. So I'm not an artist, right? I'm a writer. But art became this idea around content that I had never really intentionally thought about. And when I was going back and putting together my slides for this presentation, I kind of had this moment where I was like, I gotta talk about print art at a web conference. I don't know how this is gonna go, but I just feel like I have to. And so 6 months out before this beast came out, we were like, I think we gotta do something totally different. Like, I think we gotta take a big risk here. So this initiative, Transforming Career Services Delivery Model, we need to think about it, because who ultimately is the beneficiary? Our dean came in and he had said this, but he was really using all the transformation language. He had said, this is about our students. Ultimately, we want to prepare our students. We're a liberal arts college. The liberal arts are under attack right now. And we believe that this is important and fundamental to American society and the world. And so it was incredibly amazing that I found this student. And we honed in on his name's Dylan, who did these illustrations that really illustrated not just stories and drove our stories, but reminded us of who we were talking about. Who was the person? I think when you think of what reporters know, we don't start with what, we start with who. Who, what, where, when, why. And who was really important in thinking about this print publication. And art really became the hero. And it became a way that we were able to get some serious buy-in for thinking about content and stories that I think would have been a little bit more difficult if we hadn't had such great art as a hero early in the process, all coming out of this print publication idea. And so what did I learn just from thinking about this print publication, months out before this major initiative start? I think we can't forget about print. I know I'm at a web conference, and maybe this is going to fall a little bit on deaf ears, but I think print can be a bird's eye view, and it can be a really important grounding force. And I think it does have a role. I don't think it is the role. I never would say I'm a web first or a print first person. I would say I'm a story first person. And print to us was a really important component in getting out our message. We wanted to message to parents. We knew our parents were reading print. Set aside time, even small time. I know all of us are strapped for time, but like the time that my team spent, just a few meetings, walking up and down Bascom Hill, which is a very central place on our campus, allowed us to think big. Like, were we gonna take that risk? Were we gonna put cartoons on our annual report, which was a crazy idea at the time. And now as I'm looking back, I'm like, oh, that was really amazing. So to think big, because thinking about how we were gonna get content up to the print annual report and where it would live after became this really formative stage of upcycling and recycling. And I think it goes without saying, but like use art with intentionality. I think sometimes we're like, okay, just get an iStock photo, just put it on here, which does work. But I really wanted to think about our art with intentionality. And also, who was our artist? And this might be this like one in a lifetime moment where I had a constituent who was part of the initiative who could be an artist or designer for us. But that was really amazing because we were able to tell stories about Dylan. Read more about the illustrations on page X. Check out Dylan's portfolio online. Tweet out a picture with Dylan and tag him in it. And so there was a lot of opportunities to think about our designer and artist. And then, like, you know, if you're me and you just suck at all this, just use Canva or Pablo. I've been using both of these free editing tools for a peer-to-peer campaign that I'm working on right now in my role at the Mortgage Institute. So, and these are some of the little vignettes that Dylan did that were really awesome. So I think all of these things can help you expand the longevity. And I'm gonna talk a lot about how this art like lived for 2 years in so many different ways that I never really could have imagined. And I never would have even thought about it as content before I got to this place. So how do you take this farther? I made this slide edition last night because I was like, oh, it seems really important, I gotta edit it. So my college that I worked in was a very large, decentralized organization. One of my colleagues once said, we're like the P&G. No one knows who P&G is, everyone knows who the brands are. And I remember hearing that 6 years ago and being like, that is super important and I should remember that. And we did. And so when we thought about upcycling, recycling content that came out of this print publication across all of our channels, I started to think, okay, this is not just a weakness, this is actually a strength. So our constituents, and we had many, parents, students, we've all been in the web meeting when someone's like, well, the website's for everyone. That's kind of how my college was too. Our constituents knew Olay, they knew English, they knew Braun, they knew political science, they knew Pantene, math, they knew our departments, that's where our affinity was, that's where our constituents sort of knew who we were. Our sub-brands were incredibly strong. And so I had been thinking about this for years, and this print annual report, because it was tied to this big institutional goal, presented an opportunity to think like P&G and to do some real heavy lifting. So one of the things we did to sort of leverage this P&G network was put together some copy that could be updated. These were 300-word columns, I guess you would say. They're really like little vignettes. All using this language, charting a path that you saw on that path that I showed up there. So the sort of marketing promo became part of the brand as well as the art. And these little 300-word updates were put on alumni newsletters. I think they were on more than 14 alumni newsletters. Almost every department that we worked with put them on their websites. Many of them were tweeting them out and using them as part of their social media portfolio. And what I did is I gave them the copy, and in the second or third paragraph, can't exactly remember, we basically said, why don't you put in something of your own? What are you guys doing for the career initiative? Did you hire a career advisor? Did you host an alumni networking event? This is your section that you can update. I'm a big fan of carrot method. I work in higher education, like where you can't tell anyone to do anything. And so I gave these assets, both the copy and the art. You can see our annual report is in a couple different places, these little vignettes talking about places I never thought that they would show up, like the economics newsletter. They did. And so this copy, this charting a path language, the art, it was in all these divisible places. And I believe by my last counts were somewhere between 65,000 and 70,000 constituents in print and web. And so when I think about leveraging the P&G brand, this was something that was like a slam dunk for us in thinking about how to make content divisible. All of this language came out of that print annual report. This was really not new written content. This was just kind of repackaged together. Another thing we did is we thought about who was in that network, who had the same constituents as us, who had the same stakeholders. Parents were a huge part of this initiative because the initiative was really designed around careers. Where are our students going to go? Parents today are really concerned with the rising cost of higher education. And so we worked with the parent program, which is at the university, and they have this email newsletter that goes out to like 20,000 parents, I don't exactly remember. And so we worked with them, used some of the same copy, all from that print annual report with the art and other stock photography, and put it in their email newsletter 3 different times. So every quarter, when they were getting ready to send that email, I would email Darcy and be like, hey, Darcy, do you want an update on the career initiative? We have some brand new copy that we've been keeping updated. And here's some assets. Here's some art. Here's a link to the website. Do you need a quote? I can get it all for you. So when I think divisibly, this is like gold standard for me. I remember looking back and thinking, how did we do this? And then I remembered we did this. This came out of a print process. This came out of thinking, how could we lift this stuff as much as we could? The other thing I would just say is I feel like everything needs to be about people, right? Taking content beyond. And so some of these clippings are from print stories and some of them are from some of our web stories. One of them is an earned media piece from a local paper in Madison. But what I wanted to show this was that because we'd really focused on the who, even from that art stage and from the promo copy stage, we had these sort of ambassadors that became our people that could talk about the initiative. They became loose brand ambassadors. And so because I had anecdotes, quotes, I could grab copy from Donia's story and share it with the political science department. They became upcycled in a way that I couldn't have probably have imagined, but they became actual speakers for the initiative. And so these students were asked to come to various alumni events. Because we did a story on them and highlighted them, their department, wherever their affinity was, noticed that and was like, oh, here's a great student. This student is a success story. We should have them come speak to our alumni event. And so by really focusing on someone who had been involved and impacted by our work, I work much closely now in fundraising, and so I'm always thinking about the who's. These students were able to go to events, to meet with alumni. They became the real people impacted. And when I was thinking about, okay, we're gonna write a story about a person, I didn't think that these people would actually become upcycled in a way that their real stories and who they were going to be part of a much larger content strategy and how we were achieving our institutional goals. And so I think all of that came out of just focusing on the who. And there's so many different ways to tell the who story, right? So I think we got to be P&G sometimes. And if you're not working at a large decentralized organization, I would just encourage everyone to think about, where is our brand affinity? What does our network look like? Who's like us? Who's not like us? I know we all do this, but I think sometimes it takes a little bit more thought to really think about deliberately on how to build those networks. I'm always thinking divisibly about our messaging. So whatever I'm writing, how can I break this piece apart? Who could be interested in this one section of a message that another person might not be? And how can I get it to them? I think print and web always. I don't know why, and maybe this is just higher ed, but I feel like a lot of times my colleagues are just like, well, you do the website and then the print stuff's over here. And I'm just like, no, guys, that's not how this works. We have to think about our story. How are we telling it? What is the most effective way to get it to our audiences? And we have to be thinking about the people, always. And share your content. I mean, this is like no duh, right? But I think it's really important because I made those relationships and I made an effort to try to find the people in our units, people who were like us, people who had an interest in knowing who the success students were in their departments. And that was really important. And it created this long tail of content that I think is still living on today. Going through this process, thinking print, web, divisibly, P&G, it had many sort of aha moments where I was like, oh my God, our content just became the messaging. And someone here is probably like, isn't content always messaging? And I would be like, yeah, in theory it should be, but not always. So on a good day, yes. In practice, it's super hard. It's just very hard to do that. And so several months into this initiative, I had all these great success stories. I had some students that were super duper awesome. Our dean had started saying these words that we'd put together, charting a path, launching our students higher sooner. I started to realize that our content and the story had gone beyond transform career services delivery model, which got really exciting for me. And so our dean and all of the folks in the administration, there was an entire team, because of course higher education is going to put together a task force with recommendations on how to implement said thing. they started coming to me and using the language. And so how did I help them? How did I facilitate that? I went back to the print annual report, pulled copy from there. I kept a rolling list of accomplishments. So from print drop date through everything that was going on up until that moment. Who was tweeting at us? Who was saying they were interested? What alumni emailed someone and said that they wanted to reach out and help? How many people were doing that? I kept this sort of insane data sheet of success metrics. It didn't really live on the web anywhere, but it was something that I could pull together into these really awesome divisible pieces that I could fire off to our dean and to our leadership. And so when I think about like content beyond web, beyond print, this was like one of those things that all of a sudden I was like, oh my God, this is really happening. And that's my dean right there, Carl Schultz. We also were in this calendar, like, whoa, places I never would imagine we'd be in the University of Wisconsin parent calendar. But there's a little did you know here that's basically like, did you know about the Letters in Science Career Initiative? And you better bet that did you know came from this giant list of accomplishments and success metrics that I kind of kept at the ready with dates. And anecdotes and quotes. Who were the students? So that if we were putting together a graduation speech, if we were going to a parent scholarships reception, if we had to update the parent website, whatever we needed to do, I had some quote, some bit of copy. I could put someone's face up there as sort of who was the audience we were trying to help and who was being helped by the initiative. And so, this material got put in all these other places from leadership on through. I know these are screenshots, but the center copy is actually, we did a looking back on the year, building the initiative in our second year's annual print report. And so I was always thinking like, all right, how can I gather all this material up into bite-sized copy that helps people understand where we've come from and where we're going next. So from print, out of all places, from print idea, from charting a path, from this language that we were putting together with some of the key points about what the initiative was seeking to do, to event collateral? Didn't imagine that. We started using the vignettes and the material on our email marketing to parents and students. If you would have told me we would be sending email messages to our students with cartoons on it, I would have laughed in your face. I would have been like, no, we will not be doing that. We did, and it was great. And I think parents really understood what we were seeking to do by using this art and messaging. And it was on table tents at some of our various events that had to do with students or parents. So we really thought about how can we give this thing the most lift that it has. We used it on sponsorship proposals, which is insane to me. So the path forward, right? This charting a path language, the marketing promo. This initiative was entirely self-funded. So our dean was active on the road, privately fundraising for this because my institution at the time was taking a 13% budget cut. Maybe you've heard about it in the news. Scott Walker tried to run for president. And so I just had to, come on. And so we were using this language in funding proposals that we were putting up to Wisconsin corporations, asking for support, asking us to help us build out internship networks, help us chart the path forward. This was all language that came out of that early meeting with my team and I when I were like, what are we gonna do, guys? And then we used it in updates throughout the next year when we did secure sponsorships. And as the time when I left, we had 2 as of fall. Now I think they're up to 5 corporate sponsorships. So, just things that kind of came out of that early gestational stage that were really exciting. When I think about like upcycling, taking an illustration from a print annual report and then slapping on a corporate funding proposal, these things are usually not synonymous. And so I learned a lot about just going through these processes, which is upcycle content beyond people, places, events, things, think big. It became really surprising to me how we were able to use promo, the people, the stories, the material, the art in ways that really transcended beyond just print or web. It was print and web plus so much else. Keep a running list of accomplishments. I think whatever that big institutional goal is, organizational goal, whether you're customer side, whether you're client like myself working at an organization, I think that this just goes without saying because if you really want to think divisibly or additively, you really need to know where have we come from and where are we going next. And so I would just keep that list of data points and accomplishments, people who we knew could be our ambassadors. And then freshen up that divisible elevator pitch, that charting a path promo copy that I showed you that went in those alumni email newsletters and print newsletters and web sites. We were updating that every semester. And so every semester we would sort of rejigger the copy, give the department the opportunity to put their own section in the paragraph 2 or 3. And so that content became divisible over and over again. The other thing I would just say about content, and I think anyone who does this knows this, is like some things are just going to surprise you, and you just kind of got to roll with it. And in this case, it was mostly awesome. So I didn't plan this. This was a poster board that an administrator put up for the Teaching and Learning Symposium about pedagogical practices. I don't know anything about pedagogical practices, but they liked the art so much. They liked the art so much, and they liked charting a path life beyond Bascom Hill. These all came out of my team's early meetings about what we were going to be doing. And so this is really surprising to me, because this is really something that's a big difference from where my college was institutionally. Or this, it was on the website about all the progress reports. These are very like internal, knowledge-based like documents where people were basically reporting on what was happening with the initiative. The initiative was moving very quickly for higher ed. And so we were putting together these monthly updates, vignette copy, all the language. It was on the top header of this progress page, a page where mostly faculty were going. So it was really surprising and kind of delightful, because I had never really planned that when we originally put together the initiative's sort of material and art. It was used on a syllabus launched as part of a course. If you would have told me, Meg, this art's going to be on a syllabus, I would have been like, no, it's not. It's never going to be on a course syllabus, because faculty do course syllabuses. Greg is a faculty member I work with. He's really awesome. He's been involved in the initiative, and he immediately was like, yeah, I definitely want that. Can you send me the files for that? I'm going to put it on the course syllabus. And I was like, you're amazing. And he also put it on his website. He was blogging about the initiative, and so the art, the information about what it was, all of this was going in these places where I was like, this is awesome. I can't believe this is happening. And so Greg and I had this good relationship. His office was right below mine, and so I went down and I just talked to him. Ron and a whole bunch of other people have talked about like just knocking on people's doors. Greg was the kind of guy who I could knock on his door. Not an intimidating guy at all. He was one of my undergrad professors. And so I went down and I said to Greg, hey, when the course starts, do you have like slides or material? Like, what are you telling the students? Can I have some of that? Because I think we might be able to use it. Our Twitter following is primarily students. Also, we have a Tumblr. I think we should be using this stuff. And Greg was like, of course. And so Greg had all this sort of copy, and there were so many opportunities that we missed with this. That's on the next slide. But Greg had really easy sort of packageable bits of copy, like choosing a major, which is something that students in higher education, generally speaking, struggle with. It's a really hard decision to know what you want to major in. And so Greg had fresh advice. He had course evaluations and information after the course had initially launched. He had data and success metrics. I built this great relationship with Greg so that when I asked for it, we were able to use this copy in web. He was able to blog about it. We were able to put it in our print annual report. And so places where I kind of never imagined I'd be able to harvest copy became this great content source. I know for those of you who don't work in higher education, you're like, great, we don't have a course. But I would just think, like, what are those things happening in your area, in your market, in your field, that might be able to supply tips, tricks, things that you might be able to use in more ways than one? Because this was something that ended up becoming a really great thing that we did, as well as a great missed opportunity. And so, man, looking back on this, we should have been having some alumni or someone do some guest posts on medium.com about like how to be a Badger at Wisconsin, what are the best tips and tricks for getting your first internship, what are the 3 questions you should ask at your job. This initiative was a massive thing, and we had so many opportunities to think about content. And we had a Tumblr, but it was kind of just like sitting there not really doing anything. I could have asked students, hey, go meet with Greg once a week for 10 minutes and get his 3 best ideas, and then let's blog them. That would have been such an awesome opportunity. Greg was blogging some stuff himself, and we weren't really putting that into our social queue. I think we should have probably thought about, should we be promoting his blog in some of our print and web avenues? We weren't really doing that. Listicle content. Greg's course had so much listicle content. Everyone reads listicles. I know that you all do. And so that was an opportunity to think about what was going out for social media. What were we sharing with our alumni networks on LinkedIn? All of our P&G brands had LinkedIn networks, and those were a missed opportunity when I think about ways to share our content, especially digitally. Email marketing. We should have been emailing students because students don't read email. They do. That was an opportunity also, I think, on the cutting room floor. Insta video. I had a student who was really good at Instagram. I should have had her do Instagram videos. Like every week, she did a tip on the career initiative. We could have done something like that. We had enough content that we could have made it work. We did make some fun things work. I wish I could have done a lot more on the sort of additive social content world. But a few things. I think everyone can do these year in review, looking back on the year that was. And I'm not saying that because I think they're clickbait, but because I've had a lot of success in sort of rounding up content that we've done throughout the year and just posting that message, that roundup story. I think it's up there in the LNS year in 2014 year in review. That's our like older, crappier web template. But we would do these roundup stories. That 2014 year, the Career Initiative was the sort of top story that we promoted in that year in review. But it's a great opportunity just to get some eyeballs on the page to reinforce the messaging. I think everyone can do that. I would say if you do that, think about doing it with a 1-2 punch in January, where you or your leadership sort of looks ahead of like, what's the year gonna look like? What do we want the year to be? What's ahead of us? That's something that in my new position at the Morgridge Institute, we've thought a lot about, especially from an institutional messaging standpoint. So we can tell people, hey, this year that was, the top 3 accomplishments were X. This year we're so looking forward to growing the course by 20%, bringing back alumni for this major networking event. I think there's an opportunity to think about both of these. Web is such a good place for these types of content, especially because from just my experience in social media and higher ed, people just love to click on this stuff. And I think just thinking about milestones or other things that are happening throughout the course of the year. So higher education is very cyclical, right? And so we have major milestones like graduation. What are your major milestones? Are they holidays? Because I think those all present an opportunity to do something kind of fun around social media content or web content. The other thing I was going to say is that we did this crowdsourcing story, which a writer on my staff went and met with these 2 students, and our goal for this story was we were going to use this in our print annual report, we were going to put it on the web, and these students basically said, like, we're freshmen, we don't know what we're going to do, we both have this big question. I think one of the questions was like, what should I major in? And so she came back and she said, these students had these questions, and I couldn't answer the questions. And I was like, let's ask the internet. Like, that's a great idea. And so we did these really short profiles on the 2 students, the blonde student and the student in the Wisconsin sweatshirt. And we just put it online. I worked with my intern, we queued it up for social, and this story had 30 comments, which is 28 more comments than any other story we've ever done, ever. Because advisors and other students, and some of them were really funny, it was like their roommates being little jerks to them, but it was really funny. Advisors from our college who were really excited about the Career Initiative and wanted to sort of help students even in these formative stages of being freshmen, like it's okay to have big questions. They were responding on all these comments. So we had these 30 comments, most of whom I knew. I was looking at the names of like who was leaving these comments. I was like, oh, that's the advisor in the history department. And I remember being like, something's here. I don't know what it is, but we should do something with this. And we didn't. We didn't have enough time. But like that was such a great opportunity to think about like what was the content there? How could we have done something with that? I think one of the big takeaways is that it identified to me some more content champions in our departments. So who else had expertise? Who else had these really great ideas? Who else could contribute a quote or a story or help me find another student who was impacted by this initiative? From comments on a web story when these 2 students just had questions. And so when I think about the long tail, like that's a long tail. And then also just some quotes that we had about graduation, thinking about milestones. And so I would say that there's a lot of social media low-hanging fruit. I always would tell my student interns, Throwback Thursday, holidays, this has nothing to do with Career Initiative, I was just like, I'm gonna put this in, is every Valentine's Day, we used Tumblr, and my very awesome designer would use our stock image license, and we would put together these Valentine's Day cards. They were just images, they weren't really cards, with like a joke on them, and the joke had to do with whatever major it was. So can anyone guess what major this one was for? Philosophy, right? I thought that was a good one. There were other really good ones too, but I just thought this one was funniest. And this always got a ton of play with our students. And so we would line these up for social media promotion. So I think that's one way to think about holidays. I think sometimes holidays can be very problematic for you and your content. We had so many opportunities to think about click to tweet. We had so many quotes. We had so many stories about people in this initiative. So plugins and widgets on our WordPress instance that we should have been thinking about how could we lift this content farther. And we just weren't there yet technically. We were outsourcing almost all of our web work because my team was so small. Infographics, who was quoted in the news. There were so many opportunities because we had so many people involved in the initiative. And it's a lot when you're on a 4-person team to try to grab all that and lift it up. But I think social is always something where I think about low-hanging fruit, where our content can live in other ways and can really be the primary driver of getting people to look at our stuff with meaning and intention. So there was a lot of content within our networks. And I would say, like, looking back at all of this, there were a lot of things that I learned. And so I said I was going to give you 10 ideas. I'm hoping I gave you more than 10. Because I think that thinking about content additively or divisibly, upcycling or recycling it, gives you some opportunity to think about art as content, think about quotes and anecdotes, all these little things that have just a great opportunity to be shared and lifted across print and across web. And that's really how I'm always trying to think about this. I'm the story first person. And so my hope is that no matter where you are in your organization, you should definitely lift kettlebells, by the way, is that you're going to leave here, and I hope someone's going to try to lift some weights. And if anyone wants to talk about weightlifting, I would love to talk about weightlifting. To think divisibly, additively about making your content work for you. Grab it where it lives. Think about who is the who involved in your story, and how can you add it all together in a way that can be really meaningful. Bring focus. Think about being efficient and effective. Think about print and web. Think about all these things together. I think it's really important because your content can have this long tail. I think being results-driven is where I've always struggled. And I remember keeping these tally sheets on all of our Google Analytics and where people were going on our website. And there was a whole sort of area where I wish we had done more with our content. And there was a lot of low-hanging fruit, especially in the digital space. But it was exciting to think that results-driven could be more than just web clicks. It could be like we just identified 4 students who became really heroes in our initiative, who were going and speaking at events about their own stories. I think we were helping launching these students their own careers, which became really exciting because ultimately that's what the initiative was seeking to do. And so I think thinking beyond simple metrics is something I've always thought about. It can be about people. And so that is all I had to talk about today. So get out there and lift. Thank you. Does anyone have questions? I finished super early. I talk really fast, sorry. Does anyone have questions? Yes. Mm-hmm. So the question is, was this a very organic process? I would say the creative was, but I'll tell you what, when our dean started, this was not an organic process. So we had a major leadership transition. Our new dean retired, and the new dean came in. His name's Carl. And Carl flat out, like, he immediately made an effort to meet with my communications team of, like, the 2 of us at the time, and was like, this is very important. I need your help. You need to be involved in this. I would say higher education is, generally speaking, an organic kind of world. But I would say from thinking about the directive, this was very much a top-down organizational shift and change. I don't know if that answers your question. Mm-hmm. I would say a lot, so the question is was the content as it was happening sort of an organic process? I would say yes and no. And so part of it is that the organization I worked for, we don't really have control over our sub-brands, or we don't have control over the units in our college in a way that, although I was the assistant dean for communications, there's no way I could tell one of our departments, stop what you're doing, just because the environment that I worked in. And so I would say kinda. One of the things that I think allowed us to make this seem like it was a very organic process is that I had spent, this was in 2013, I had already been in letters and science for 4 or 5 years, building relationships with key people in the departments. And I really just have to go back to what Ron was saying about knocking on people's doors. And so I knew who some of the content people were in our departments. I'm using like scare quotes because these are usually career advisors or like not content people who are also in charge of the website. And so I had made a lot of effort building those relationships with people so that I could give them content in a way that it wasn't like, hey, you're treading on my area. It was more like you're helping me with the messaging. And so I was always trying to think about this in terms of how could I be helpful with a carrot to people who really were strapped for time, often were not content people, and were definitely not web people. And so that was something that was really important, I think, in some of our success. Some of it might be higher education. I think maybe just people play well. So I don't know if that answers your question. Okay. How much? That's a good question. Dumbbell or barbell? How much can I snatch? I like how you use the word snatch. Barbell. The other day I was doing, I think we had 65. I'm not sure. I was just doing it, but I've been doing single arm, not the full bar. I usually like doing with kettlebell. That was a super good question about weightlifting, especially women. Oh my God, women, we have to be in the weight room. Please come talk to me. You have to be there. I will tell you how to do it. It's awesome. So, anything else about content? Everyone's like, you talked about print. Get out of here. It's the web conference. Okay, cool. Thank you.